In the first real video I posted, The Case for a Car-Free Manhattan, in the outro of the video I asked for feedback, any comments, questions, or criticisms. I ended up getting 321 at the time of me writing the script, and I've also taken a look at the feedback and found and responded to some things that I've got or done wrong and clarified what I meant at some points. There's been so many comments and so many points where I've had to reply that I've just decided to make a follow-up. As I said in some of my responses, I'll go more in depth as to how a car-free Manhattan, by this I mean Central Business District, everything below 60th Street, would function, and what would happen to the bridges and tunnels into Manhattan. So now let's begin with a more precise rundown of how the plan would function in the long run. First, for those who haven't watched the first video, the plan entails all or nearly all personal vehicles being banned from entering the portion of Manhattan below 60th Street. I didn't make the 60th Street thing clear enough last time. If you're wondering why, the aforementioned video explains this in better detail. The problem with it was that it didn't explain the how, which... First, every bridge, tunnel, and avenue that leads to the Central Business District would be blocked by retractable bollards like the ones at the World Trade Center. This would allow essential vehicles like fire trucks, police cars, construction vehicles, produce trucks, ambulances, all that stuff, to enter the Central Business District to do what they need to do. This means yes, car lines would still have to exist for these vehicles, but they're obviously in much less quantities and only on major roads. Next, you'd have to slowly reconstruct every street to use the reclaimed space. There's a lot of ways that you can do it, but I made a concept for the avenues, just because. Progressing inwards, we first have wider sidewalks with way more trees planted on them, also rid of those godforsaken scaffolding. Then tram lanes right off the sidewalks for easier boarding and disembarking. Then, wide bike lanes in both directions and a lane of vehicle traffic in the middle, separated from everything else by a solid barrier with native trees planted. Buses could use the tram lanes too. One thing to note is that every street differs from one another, so they would all have to be redesigned. For example, smaller streets would just be fully pedestrianized, and underground parking garages could be repurposed as tram depots, as this commenter proposed. I'm sure there's a better way to redesign Manhattan's avenues, but that's my flawed plan. Now this leaves the question, what do we do with the bridges and tunnels? Well, if everything below 60th is close to cars, that would make the Lincoln, Holland, Battery, its only true name, and Queens Midtown tunnels completely useless to car traffic, along with the Brooklyn, Manhattan, Williamsburg, and Queensboro, bridges as well. In terms of the bridges, the upper levels can just be pedestrianized and have bike, tram, and bus lanes, while the lower levels could serve new train lines if they don't already, tram and bus lanes, and be used by the essential vehicles to enter the Central Business District. I'm just going to start saying CBD now. As for the tunnels, they could also serve new train lines and be used by essential vehicles. Path could definitely use the Holland and especially Lincoln tunnels, or just really any train line. New lines and or extensions could use the repurposed tunnels to cross the East or Hudson rivers. It really helps that each tunnel that I mentioned is really two tunnels running parallel to each other and given a singular name, which means even more space. While a car-free CBD would be an amazing change in my opinion, there's many things that need improving first. First, as I mentioned towards the end of the first video, and I will admit that the MTA needs to be improved a lot. There's so many extensions and new lines in both Manhattan and the outer boroughs that could be built to improve service and coverage that need its own separate and extremely long video. And that's not even mentioning the commuter, which should be regional, rail lines that deserve their own videos too. But I guess I could give a brief rundown of the Long Island Railroad. It's expensive, infrequent, low ridership, slow when you realize how far out they go. Yes, 60 to 80 miles an hour is damn near high-speed rail in the city, but once you get out to Nassau and God help your soul, Suffolk, that seems to begin to get slower and slower, especially if the branch you're on stops frequently. I like how comfortable it is though. So obviously the subway needs expanding and more frequent service. Now this leaves the suburbs. In Nassau, a lot of Long Island Railroad stations are barely upzoned around it. And in Suffolk, just not at all, besides a few exceptions like Port Jefferson, Stony Brook, and Islip. Same thing goes with the Metro North, but to a lesser extent. And NJT just doesn't even bother, barely even attempted to around major stations like Secaucus Junction. So that begs the question, how are these people supposed to get to Manhattan and really anywhere in the city? This is where park and rides play a role. It's in the name, hopefully I don't have to explain them. Basically, you park your car and ride the train. These commuter rails should also be way less expensive and not come once every 2 hours. As much as I dislike them, NIMBYs are actually kind of slightly, in a way, a bit right when they say that there's no other way to get to Manhattan. Transit takes a long time, and the MTA drags its feet doing literally anything when they should be expanding, which is a whole different video topic. With all that hopefully put to rest, let's talk about the CBD itself. First, this would benefit everybody who doesn't drive into the CBD, which is every sane New Yorker, and the people living there. Let me explain. In one of my responses to a comment which highlighted many concerns over how people would live, I explained the workarounds to the situations which all but one were rare occurrences, and also counterpoints I got in the comment section, so I guess this is the counterpoint section. Without a car, how would you get a newborn baby home from the hospital? Hospitals could run a program where vehicles are used to bring newborns home. This happens so relatively rarely that it wouldn't hold a candle to the previous car traffic volumes. It would also mean that the vehicles go faster than they would have had the ban not been done. This also applies to ambulances, police cars, fire trucks, and the sort. Now you're probably thinking, hospitals would just charge ridiculous prices for the newborn service, just like ambulances. I'd say this more so highlights a problem with our country than a car-free Manhattan. Or someone with mobility issues to get to a doctor, a mobility scooter, or in the case of an emergency, an ambulance. I'd argue mobility scooters would actually be better for those with limited movement than a car, as they wouldn't have to struggle to find a space to park and then have to walk a varying distance to the hospital itself. I guess it also gives more of an incentive to the MTA to make more stations/new train models more accessible, which they're already doing, just really slowly. This is the MTA we're talking about. Or someone move from one apartment to another. Again, also using vehicles permitted within Manhattan. Or get groceries from Costco. There's only one Costco in all of Manhattan, and that one's all the way in East Harlem, when again, I was only really talking about a car-free CBD, which is everything below 60th Street. The Costco in question is on 118th Street. In the event of that extremely rare trip, I'd imagine Manhattanites do not go to big box stores like Costco in the first place. A cargo bike would do just the job, like what they do in many other non-car dependent places. And C, you might think of places like Home Depot or furniture and appliance stores such as Lowe's and, well, again, for that rare once in every multiple year scenario, everyone's just better off renting a vehicle to move it to their home. In fact, the stores in question would probably set up a system where they'd bring it to your building and help you move it up to your apartment. Obviously, most people live in apartments, lofts, and flats, etc. Or how would a package from Amazon be delivered? Well, Amazon and other delivery companies already have a team of people delivering via e-bike in the urban areas. It's not a stretch for them to hire more from Manhattan Delivery. They already do it in Brooklyn. Now, other counterpoints I got from comments include cycling safer? For whom? Try being a pedestrian in NYC with all the bicycles. Worse than cars. They don't even stop at red lights most of the time. Well, for one, my street redesign proposal would have bike lanes towards the middle, separated by a tram lane before the sidewalk. Crossing the street would be easier, as there's less street to cross. Crossing bicycle traffic is obviously easier and faster than crossing car traffic. And the lane for motor vehicles would have minimal traffic due to there being less vehicles. There is truth to the cyclists not stopping at red lights most of the time point, however. Though bicycles obviously don't do as much damage to people as cars do. Many commenters also mentioned people needing to get home from bars drunk at late nights, and transit running too frequently at those hours for such a thing. Normally, I would say that it's why we should run transit more, which we should, but we should still have taxis and rideshares running in the CBD at late nights as a sort of safety net. One last interesting note are companies like Big Bus Tours. You can't go on a 7-second interval in Manhattan without seeing one of these, but that's not what's important. What is important, however, is what happens to Big Bus and other companies like them. Personally, I say they could still operate, but this can be a whole different debacle. Okay, now that we've gotten through a few of the counterpoints of the CBD part of the plan, let's talk about the outer boroughs now, which I'll count as everything not within the CBD. In the previous video, I mentioned that the outer boroughs could be redesigned to be more pedestrian, cyclist, and transit friendly, citing trams as a useful new, as in reintroduced, transit mode. They're like a faster bus with so much more capacity. In this case, wide streets that already have bus lanes on them would be perfect for trams, such as Highland Boulevard, which already has a bus-only lane, which could be retrofitted with tram tracks. It would certainly help the overcrowding on the 78 and especially 79. In fact, all select bus service lines, by their very skip-stop nature, could just be turned into tram lines, like what Mystic highlighted in his video. As for cycling infrastructure, things vary a lot by borough, but generally a network of quality bike lanes protected by a barrier of trees and greenery on the bigger roads that sort of feed into the smaller streets where getting ran over isn't as big of an issue would suffice, at least in the areas I'm familiar with. And as for walkability, it's already great. It's just crossing the street and narrow sidewalks that are the biggest problems in my eyes. Though on Staten Island, there is a bit of a problem where our sidewalks just suddenly decide to end for no reason or be completely overgrown. But now let's go back to Manhattan. Specifically, how would a car-free Manhattan be phased in? Well, it could begin with a portion of a major street being closed to cars for a long period of time as a test. Once the results discussed in the first video yield, the second phase could be restricting cars' access to a major street below 60th, like say, Broadway. Small side streets common below Houston could also be pedestrianized. A third phase could entail redesigning all major roads with bike lanes like the ones I described earlier. The redesigns would also remove more space from cars, and a feasibility study for trams could be conducted by the MTA. And eventually, you just close the CBD to cars. Now, what worries me the most about this car-free CBD plan are the millionaires and billionaires living within the CBD who hold a lot of power, and are the type to own cars in Manhattan despite all their downsides. My fear is that they wouldn't allow such a change and leverage their political power to block such changes. So this got me thinking, if that happens, what would a less drastic form of this plan look like? First, cars would be allowed within the CBD, but without as dominant as a role they play today. Small streets would still probably become car-free, but major ones, especially the horizontal ones that lead to river crossings, like Canal Street, would probably still have most of their space dedicated to cars. The avenues would probably be less like that, but still be a nightmare to cross. Trams could still be built, and the expansion of the subway and improvement of the commuter rail network are non-negotiable. Okay, now I should be finished with this video. Same thing I say in all the outros apply here again, so if I made any mistakes or missed something, tell me. I managed to make so many mistakes and left so many things unclear or unanswered that it warranted a whole new video. I wasn't really expecting it to get such a massive response, like it was just meant to be a starting out video, but then too many people saw it, and no response is really bulletproof, even with the longest script you've ever made. Also, it should be noted that the summer is almost over already. It's absolutely ridiculous. It feels like we just started summer and now Bo is halfway out the door already. But I wouldn't say this for like any random reason. As you can tell by my voice, I'm kind of young. This means that when school starts back up again, I won't have so much time on my hands anymore, especially to go all the way to Bayside and get 10 seconds of footage. Note, that's actually why last video took so long. It was completed for like a week or two before I actually released it. I just need to go to Bayside for those 10 seconds of footage. But anyway, all that means that how much I upload after this point will be sort of dependent on how much of a pain this year will be. So I'm not really that sure. But I guess that does it for this video. So see you when I see you. I haven't decided the next video's topic yet. So now let's begin with a more precise run. Can we stop with this creaky chair, bro? What the